Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I am here with the 10 cards 1 kit video for the Love from Lizi September kit. The kit is currently sold out, it has been shipped, and so if you don't have your kit already, it's on its way, or you can subscribe to get next month's kit when it is released. Today's video serves mostly as inspiration for those who already have the kit because, as I said, it is unavailable. I am starting with a shaker card with this Peacock die, and I kind of wound up thinking I was a little bit crazy because this is a really fussy die to try to do the technique I'm going to do with it, but it turns out pretty cool, and I think that it can definitely be worth it. But as you see, to make things easier, I put a little bit of Stick It on the back of the cardstock that I cut the Peacock out of, and it was the shimmer gray cardstock. By having the Stick It on the back, I thought that it would make things easier because all of the tiny pieces that I'm going to try to glue back on would already be sticky. But then it's also kind of difficult because then you have to peel all the backer paper off the things that are sticky, like all the little tiny pieces. So I'm not sure which way is the best call. You could give a try to the other method of adding glue to the pieces, but I don't know. I think that ultimately the Stick It was the right call, but I just want to warn you, super fussy technique that I'm about to do. So I've die cut the Peacock and I've placed it back inside of the piece of cardstock after adding some vellum. I chose vellum because I wanted to do something a little bit more subtle and elegant to match up with the shimmer cardstock that I'm using. And I'm going to peel off the entire backing sheet, but as you see, that's going to cause a lot of the little pieces to come off, but not all of them. And here, as I place it down, I'm careful to apply pressure only to the little pieces that I want to actually stick to the vellum. I don't want the main part of the die to stick to the vellum. In fact, I'm going to take this gray Peacock and make a whole other card with it later. Instead, what I want is to push down all of those other pieces through the die. And I don't want to apply any pressure to the large Peacock because I want to be able to peel it off in the end. Right now, it's just sort of acting as a guide for where all these little tiny pieces go. And I found that since I didn't apply too much pressure, I was able to peel it off in the end. So the pieces that stuck to the backer sheet were actually easier to apply because I was able to take a little craft pick here and peel them off the backer sheet, then apply them where they should go inside of the Peacock. Again, super fussy work because sometimes it can be even hard to tell which little tiny piece you need to go into which place. But I think there's a lot to be said for making really special cards sometimes too. I make a lot of quick and simple cards in big batches, like when I do my 6x6 paper pad tutorials. But I also like to make really fussy, pretty special cards for people too. So this is definitely going to be one of those cards. Now, the little tiny pieces that didn't come off with the backer sheet, that are now still stuck inside the Peacock, I'm going to have to take those out, peel off the backer tape, and then add them. But as you can see, I was able to eventually get it all off. I tried to speed things up and cut out some of the video to save time because there are 10 cards here. But I thought the process was important for you to see how to, get all those little bits in. Then I want to make it a shaker. The Love from Lizi kit this time includes a really pretty sequin mix. However, it has some really tiny pieces in it. And since I used vellum for the shaker bit rather than a piece of clear plastic, which in hindsight I think I probably would have used clear plastic because it would have made the shaker part more prominent and interesting, I didn't want to use too many of the little tiny pieces because I felt like you wouldn't see them anyway, and so I could save them for a different project. But here's my shaker, and at first you can't even really notice that it's a shaker, but once it gets moving around, you see this really pretty subtle shift in the colors behind the Peacock, and I think that it adds a lot of interest. I'm going to put it on some of the really pretty background paper that is in the Love from Lizi kit. I like that the kit included so much beautiful paper. It's specialty paper, either two-sided or shine or, like shimmer all kinds of special things about this pattern paper. Now, since I already had the gray shimmer Peacock cut out from the first card, I definitely thought I would make life easy and make a quick card with that one to kind of compensate for all the time that I had spent on the other one. I wanted to create a card using the new embossing powder from Love from Lizi. I thought it was a really pretty color, went really well with the other elements of the kit. However, placing it on top of this pattern paper, it wasn't as noticeable as I hoped it would be, so I might recommend maybe a different pattern if you're going to try to recreate something similar. I think that the embossing powder on the sentiment adds a lot to the sentiment, but maybe just on a subtler pattern paper. So I want to let you know that I'm feeling a little self-conscious right now because I'm using a brand new to me microphone, and I'm trying to keep a steady distance between me and the microphone so that my voice doesn't fade in and out or get too loud or spikes like that. So I hope that the sound quality is pretty good for this first time, and over time I will get more used to it. But I'm going to glue that Peacock down. He already had stick-it tape on the back of him, but I added a little bit of extra adhesive because sometimes when you're working with shimmer cardstock, it is a little bit harder for things to stick, and you want to use a really strong adhesive. I'm not sure that Stick-It is the strongest adhesive out there because I haven't used it very much, so I decided basically not to take a chance with it. Love from Lizi included the 8x8 pattern papers this time as opposed to 6x6 pattern papers. What's pretty cool about that is you can get at least 2 card backgrounds from each 8x8 paper, because if you do a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 note card, which is pretty standard size, you can then cut 2 pieces of 4 by 5 1/4 for background pieces. And so here I'm just adhering both of those pieces that I recently made to some card bases that I made with the cardstock in the kit. As you probably know, the cardstock in the kit is slightly different than American size cardstock, so cutting it in half doesn't equal 2 perfect card bases. You can make 2 smaller card bases. I think that you can get 2 4-bar cards out of it. However, I really like the traditional size card bases. So what I choose to do is take each piece of cardstock, make 1 card base, and then save the extras for layering and different techniques and things to do on the card. And then I just supplement it with white cardstock, which I buy in bulk from Michaels. I use the Recollections cardstock. One of my absolute favorite things about this current Love from Lizi September kit is those glitter peel-offs. The reason that I really like them is because they are sealed in glitter. There's no shedding. And so I just put one of those down and one of the bows from the kit. And then I'm ready to move on to another card. I've already created a shaker card, and I was looking at this lace thinking that it would also make a nice shaker card, trying to trap some sequins behind it. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it was Lizzie's video that I was watching where she does make a shaker card with the lace. However, I tried doing that, and I'm just not liking the way that it's turning out. I think it's because I made certain decisions that didn't really make sense. I should have added some more foam behind it, give it a little more room to shake. But I encourage you to give it a shot and to check out the other designers' videos and see if they were a bit more successful. I like how my card turned out, but I do think that a shaker card with a lace would be really pretty too, and there's plenty more lace, so I could totally make it another time. Here I have trimmed out the lace to about the size of the card, and the lace is a little bit fussy to cut. I don't think it would cut very well in your paper trimmer, so I do suggest scissors like I used. And I cut it just a little bit smaller, but made sure that it was bigger than this oval die. And the oval dies that I'm using are just really basic oval dies from Cat Scrappiness. They sell a lot of basic dies. And because I wasn't sure how securely the lace would stick, I did add a little bit of Scotch tape to help hold it down. Since there are so many holes, of course, in lace, I didn't know if it would grab onto enough of the adhesive. I also want to apologize for the fact that my voice is probably sounding a little bit gravelly and dry or something like that. This beginning of the school year has come recently, and it tends to be teaching first grade that I talk a lot with the kids just as I'm helping them learn all the new routines and things like that. And so my voice tends to suffer. And so if I've been a little bit gruff in past videos or am for the next couple weeks, you'll kind of know that it's just that I'm talking a lot and not getting enough water and trying to work on that. So here's where I'm going to try to turn it into a shaker card. And the little sequin bag that comes in your kit is usually enough to make like 2 or 3 cards, but if you do order the sequins separately from Love from Lizi, they are in bigger bags. So if you really like a sequin mix that's coming up in a kit and you know you want to make a bunch of cards with it, I do recommend getting an additional pack because it is just a small sampling size. Great for a few cards, but like I said, usually only about 2 or 3. Now, I trapped the sequins in, and because I didn't add any foam tape, unsurprisingly, they didn't really shake. But I was worried that if I added a lot of foam tape, that the sequins would move around so much they'd slip between the pieces of lace. What I think the way to try it is, if I was going to try it again, and I might as I have more time, would be to use a really thin foam tape so that there's just enough room for the sequins to move, but not so much that they're tossing all about and falling through the lace. I would also recommend, of course, to use the larger sequins as they're less likely to fall through the lace, whereas the tiny little stars that come in the kit, probably not so much. Once I realized that the sequins weren't going to work, I decided to try to add some more embellishments and little touches to make this card work. And I thought since I was already using the lace that I would pair it with some other elegant elements from the kit, namely this soft ribbon. It comes in 2 colors in the kit. I don't know the exact kind of name for what this ribbon is, but it's like a fuzzy ribbon with some satin detail at the edges, and then that ribbon slider that has the rhinestones attached to it. And that would go with the elegance of the lace. Then I put a cardstock sentiment area, also cut from the same oval stackables, into the center. When I make these 10 card 1 kit videos, I do generally try to include as many different things from the kit as possible. I do sometimes limit myself to, if I think that things wouldn't work so well for card donating, I maybe don't make as many things with them. I'll make a handful for some people that I will hand deliver cards to rather than the cards that I donate. But in general, I'm trying to give you kind of a sampling of all the things that are in the kit. So here I'm determined to use some things from the kit that I haven't already used, namely these burlap butterflies and the twine that goes with it. I really love the look of craft cardstock. However, sometimes it can seem, a little bit, I don't want to say boring, but just that it's very like grown up, pretty elegant. And I make a lot of cards for kids, so I try to find ways to also make it sort of whimsical. And the way that I'm going to do that is with an arrangement of butterflies. I kind of just put down the "you go get it" sentiment. I guess I said, yeah. Without fully coming up with my card design, which is not necessarily the recommendation. As you can see, a lot of times I do tend to play with things before I stick them down. But in this case, I thought I had a really secure idea, slapped that sentiment down, and then it turned out that I didn't like my original plan. And I did try to think of this would be a great excuse to also use those envelopes because they are similar in the craft color. So I was able to use the craft cardstock, the burlap butterflies, the jute twine, all of that in these similar colors. And I eventually realized that the butterflies just were not fitting around the sentiment. So I was able to very carefully place the envelope such that it covered that entire sentiment, and then re-stamp the sentiment in a place that made sense. So if you're thinking, oh, my card is ruined, I made a mistake, I got too kind of hasty like I did here, be flexible, continue to play with it and see if you can maybe salvage it. It doesn't always work out, and you might make a card that isn't your favorite, but especially with a kit where you have a whole pile of stuff in front of you, usually you can come up with a substitution and pull something else in. As I was putting down these butterflies, and I really liked the idea that the one butterfly is flying out of the envelope. Again, I think that added some whimsy to what might otherwise be a very sort of, not fancy card, but just, a little bit more grown up. And I put a little bit of foam tape behind the butterflies as well, just because they were kind of lumpy from sitting on top of the envelope, and that smoothed them out a bit. Now, since I'd created so many detailed cards with all kinds of elements, I decided to try to do something a little bit more simple. And this card is just a lot of really basic stamping. When I want to get a great impression with black ink and my clear blocks as opposed to my Misty, I always reach for my VersaFine ink. The biggest drawback of VersaFine ink is that it's not Copic safe, so I would not be able to color these in with Copics. I could do water-based markers, and that would be totally fine, but I'm looking for a simple black and white card here. So I'm fine with the fact that I can't color this. And happy that I'm going to get super crisp images the very first time I stamp because I'm using that VersaFine pigment ink. I stamped the wreath from the stamp set as well as the flower element, and I used the flower element to create a sort of background page or background, pattern paper around the wreath. And what's awesome about the stamp set, and you probably realized this right away, but if you hadn't, important to note that all of the sentiments fit inside the wreath. And even though I made this card pretty clean and simple and it's very black and white, and again, I think that these are going to make some great teen cards because they have that little bit of elegant elements to them, I am going to add a touch of interest to both of them by adding a bit of shimmer cardstock and by adding a little bow from the kit. Even though I was using that shimmer cardstock for a mat, I didn't want to waste all of it, so I used a rectangle die to cut out the center, and I just took that frame, and it looks like a whole sheet of cardstock, but it's not. So if you have some precious cardstock, like these beautiful shimmer cardstocks that come in the Love from Lizi kit, be sure to save the insides. Cut a rectangle, oval, square, something out of the inside. And I do recommend using a die as opposed to trying to hand cut it, just so that that piece that you cut out with the die can then be right away used, as it already has a nice finished edge to it. And then I took a little Zot, which is a kind of like a glue dot, and stuck on that bow. I like those little dot adhesives because they are super strong and great for adding thick embellishments to a card. Moving on to my next card. I was really inspired by all of the beautiful pattern papers that came in the Love from Lizi kit this month. However, I was only making 10 cards, and so I knew that there would be a lot of pattern papers that I wouldn't even get a chance to use. But I was also already developing a little pile of scraps, so I came up with an idea for how to use those scraps. I believe that these are 2 inches, so I took 2 by 2 inch squares, and I cut them in half to make triangles. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the pattern paper in the kit, if it's not specialty, is double-sided. And that works perfect for a technique like this because you can turn them over, and as you sort of create a little patchwork pattern here, you can vary up the patterns. They'll all coordinate perfectly because it is a set that is designed to work together. It's a kit of pattern paper, so you kind of take some of the guesswork out of it. But you don't have to have, even though I'm only using 2 pieces of pattern paper, I'm really getting 4 patterns, which is kind of nice. And as I mentioned before, these glitter peel-offs are one of my favorite things about the kit, so I was trying to use them in a number of ways, and I wanted to create a really graphic looking card, and I thought that the triangles paired well with the lines, and I was trying to also create the look of movement, and that's why when I put down the lines of the glitter peel-offs, I didn't line them up perfectly. Instead, I staggered them, just like I'm staggering the triangles. And I don't want to fill the entire background with the triangles because then it won't have as much of a look of movement. Instead, it will just look like a big, square pattern. But by leaving it a little bit uneven, it actually gives it more interest, in my opinion. And as you can see, I am gluing them down and then turning it over and trimming off the edge. And I'm taking those little trimmed pieces and I'm sometimes using them to fill out pieces of the card. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons, because it's giving me some new shapes, it's giving me some small triangles to work with, but also because it's using up a little bit less of the pattern paper, and it's really pretty pattern paper. I only was using scraps here too, so I don't have an endless supply of it. I fussed around a little bit towards the end, not quite sure how I wanted to finish off the card, but I did also want to mention that when I was working on this card, I was watching a show called Project Runway, which some of you might be familiar with, and it's a fun show to watch when you're designing cards because on the show, they're working a lot with pattern and color and design, and so sometimes you can get some interesting ideas or just feel really inspired by watching other people create. So of course I love watching YouTube videos as well and seeing people create, but sometimes seeing people create with different mediums like fabric instead of pattern paper or instead of stamps can be really inspiring as well. As you can see, even though I'm using my ATG, which is a strong adhesive, you do have a few seconds to spare, so if you put down a piece and you don't love it, you can take it off. Just be very careful as you peel it up because it does sometimes peel up a bit of the cardstock. As mentioned, Lizi included some really beautiful, wonderful pattern papers in this kit. But I was also tempted to try to be creative and do some unexpected things, and so I did wind up trying to create some of my own patterns. Lizi included a Versamark square pad. Although a lot of people have Versamark pads in their collection already, having this little square can be nice because if you didn't, then you would automatically have something to use the embossing powder with, as Lizi is coming out with embossing powder in this kit, and there are more to come as far as I can tell from the Love from Lizi videos that she's been sharing. And I thought, well, since, I had this fun little pad, why not try to do a technique with it? And I basically created my own pattern here by using the ink pad as a stamp and stamping little squares. They're not perfect squares, and being squished is making more ink come out at the edges, and so my embossing powder does wind up a little bit lumpy. And I will admit, this is probably not my favorite card. However, I was happy to try something new. I'm always trying to challenge myself to look at the products in the little bit less obvious way. And so I did like the graphic element I was able to create. As you could see, it does leave a little bit of a watermark look behind, so you could see where you were stamping them. But I felt like if I tried to line up all these little cubes perfectly, I would have driven myself crazy and they wouldn't have been perfect. So I very intentionally made it just sort of a mishmash. And I also thought it was a great opportunity to show you how beautiful this particular embossing powder is, because here I am melting a whole lot of it. Of course, be sure that you are using your anti-static bag, especially with a technique like this where you're trying to cover the whole surface and trying to brush off little bits could get really frustrating. And then I embossed a sentiment as well. I originally had stamped it imperfectly, and I was able to just sort of flip the cardstock over. That's always a great idea to do, is, if you mess up one side, flip it over, try the other side. Of course, there's only two sides, so you might have to just have a make it work moment, which is also from Project Runway, when you mess up 2 times. Or sometimes it's okay to just give up on a piece of cardstock. If you're trying to emboss a sentiment and you've flipped it over and tried to get on the other side and it's still not right, there's plenty of paper in the world. You have loads of cardstock. You'll probably be okay getting rid of it. I do try to salvage everything, as you know, but again, I think sometimes we need to also hear that, it's okay if you mess up to trash something. You don't always have to, and I'm not saying you should trash everything you don't like, but sometimes you can as well. Anyway, again, I was inspired by Project Runway, and they were doing, I think they had an unconventional challenge that I was watching where they were making stuff out of garbage. So I was like, I gotta keep getting creative. And I wanted to do something else cool with this pattern paper. This pattern paper is beautiful, but I didn't want to just keep gluing it as layers of paper. So I came up with the idea of trying to create some interesting folds with it, some layering. As you can see, it's kind of, as you will see, it's kind of reminiscent of fabric because I'm creating these layered ruffles. And so I scored this pattern paper every 1/2 inch, and then I am folding it so that it creates a cascading look, so that all of these are sort of it's like creating a waterfall look down, if that makes sense. Like rather than just sort of folding it up like a fan, I allowed it to lengthen as I went. And if it's a little bit confusing, I know that I don't have great words for how to describe what I did, so I would suggest maybe watching the video a few times. But basically, I would fold it over, then fold it such that it was longer and over again, so that I lengthened and created a layer, and lengthened and created a layer. And a long piece of 8-inch paper turned into, I would say, about 3 inches. So you definitely lose a lot of length by doing this folding technique, but it also looks really cool with these bold patterns. And once I was done, I just sort of picked which side I liked better. In that case, it was sort of the spotted paper here. And I decided to add a touch of interest with these glitter peel-offs. As I said, they were one of my favorite things, so I'm going to use them over and over again in this kit video. I thought at first about just adding it to the top, but when I added it there, I really liked the way it looked. Of course, it would have been easier if I had put all these glitter strips on before I adhered the ruffles, I'm going to call them, to my card base. But now they're already there, and I don't want to peel it up and ruin the card base or ruin the ruffles. So what I'm doing is placing the peel-offs down and then coming in with my little sharp scissors, my EK Success nonstick scissors, and I'm able to trim right to the edge of each of the ruffles. And I'm going to put a little piece of glitter peel-off on every single ruffle to accentuate them. Yeah, I think I said that right. And sorry, again, sometimes it's really difficult to talk through this many cards. But at first I thought, well, I'll leave some blank space at the top because this is so bold and so interesting. It'll be okay to leave a lot of blank space. However, I didn't really feel like any of the sentiments filled that space quite the way that I wanted them to. And so I decided to create another piece of ruffle paper. As you hear, I'm trying some of the sentiments. What's nice about clear stamps is you can do that. You can sort of just hover them over and see through them and see how they look. But I realized that I didn't really like how that was looking. So I made another ruffle piece and filled up the rest of the card. Then I took a purple oval from the purple cardstock that I already used, and I added a butterfly and a sentiment because, again, I am trying to use up lots of different little things in the kit. I hadn't used any of the burlap butterflies yet, so I incorporated them. Now we're getting towards the end of the video. I believe this is finally the 10th card. No, this is the 9th card. I really liked the Peacock die, wanted to use it a few more times, wanted to create something relatively simple but really showed off some of the pretty things that were included in the kit. So I am gluing on 3 peacocks cut from some of the specialty pattern paper. I am using multimedia matte from Ranger because even if a little bit sort of squeezes out the edges, it will stick. However, I also put stick it on the back of these because it's an intricate die. As you can see, it's pretty fussy to get stick it off, even when you're not working with small bits. And they do recommend that, like, because there are some cuts in the stick it paper, you could put your die through that part of the paper, but sometimes that wastes. So you kind of just have to accept that it's a little bit fussy. I'm here poking out all those little pieces. I know they make some fancy tools for that. I've never invested in one. I've heard some negative things about them, but I'm going to glue these down. I'm going to keep it simple here, and I thought that I would try the Nuvo drops this time. I haven't used Nuvo drops very much, and this was a brand new bottle, so I think it was flowing a little bit more quickly than I thought it was, and so I'm really leaning over to try to control it, so sorry about my head getting in the way there a bit. But I was able to add the Nuvo drops to the peacocks to create little eyes for them. And when I messed up a Nuvo drop, I found that I was actually able to wipe it away. and without ruining my card, which kind of surprised me in a very pleasant way because I was pretty convinced that at that point I had ruined it. Luckily, I would have been able to cut most of that stuff again because it wasn't anything too special, but I was able to save it. And here I kind of running out of steam. I'm going to be honest with you. Made a lot of cards that night, and I'm still trying to kind of take advantage of the pattern paper though because it's pretty and let it do its thing. But here I stamped on top of the pattern paper, and even though I chose a bigger, bolder pattern, I don't love that it's not as readable as I thought it would be. I thought that the black sentiment was going to be a little bit thicker and more bold, even though it's a clear stamp. I should have known what size it was. I don't know that it's the most readable. And so again, I might recommend trying a different pattern paper. In fact, this background paper that I'm choosing here would have been better to stamp on. I should have reversed the two. But, live and learn. And also, as I sometimes say, do as I say, not as I do, because I'm experimenting and trying to make the mistakes for you, hopefully, so that you will make some better choices as you go to card make. And so here I'm again trying to pull in some of the ribbon. There was a couple pieces of ribbon from the kit that I hadn't used yet. I also didn't use the chameleon marker, and that's because I need a lot more practice with it. I tried using the chameleon marker, and I think I'm maybe just too used to Copics, so hopefully I can play with those more and share in the future. But I do think that unfortunately, for me, just it's a whole new skill to learn, and I'm just so used to a different way of blending. But maybe in the future I can share more about those chameleon markers. Here I'm continuing to add the ribbon that I hadn't used yet, or the fibers that I hadn't used yet, and I'm using a lot of Scotch tape to tape them down because it's really hard to stick any kind of adhesive behind these little silver bits here. I did put down a little ATG gun and they are sticking to it, but it's not controlling it very well, so the Scotch tape on the back is helping it stay much more in line. Try not to pull too tight with your Scotch tape as you're wrapping it around because that can kind of curve the cardstock. I also recommend a bit of foam behind anything that you put over ribbon just to make it a little more flat. So that is it for my 10 cards, 1 kit for the Love from Lizi September kit. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more tutorials, including a recent Peacock feather die shaker card that was created with some similar ingredients, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. You can get the link in the video description to sign up for future Love from Lizi kits, and have an awesome day. Bye.